We do have some new details on South Korea's deadliest air disaster in decades. Officials now confirming the Jeju Air pilot reported a bird strike and declared Mayday just minutes before making the doomed emergency landing yesterday. Authorities say an air traffic controller had warned about birds in the area just moments before. Video appears to show the aircraft without its landing gear fully deployed. It's unclear why, though. 179 people died in this crash. Just two crew members sitting in the tail section of the Boeing 737 survived. South Korea's acting president has now ordered an emergency safety inspection of the country's entire airline operations system, and the U.S. is sending a team to help with the investigation. Let's talk more about this now with CNN aviation analyst Miles O'Brien. And Miles, just first off, we're just learning that Southwest Airlines says it's now working with investigators in the Jeju Air crash. Can you tell us why they might be involved?
Southwest Airlines has an awful lot of experience with that particular 737 model. Perhaps they might bring some expertise to bear. They have had a couple of overrun events themselves. Beyond that, I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to find that out. I didn't mean to pop quiz you because we're just learning these things, but officials are saying that the pilot reported this bird strike before the crash, and then you also have the plane's landing gear not down in either pair of landing gear. Could those two things be connected?
Probably not, Brianna. There's no reason to believe that an engine failure, even two-engine failure, would make it impossible for the crew to bring down the landing gear. The absolute last-ditch way of doing that is literally pulling on a cable which attaches to a latch, and the gear just falls down by virtue of gravity. So that is not likely. I've come to the conclusion, Brianna, that it was the intention of that flight crew to have the landing gear up. And you may ask why. Well, if that aircraft had lost both engines, and it was, for all intents and purposes, a glider, they would have been trying to preserve as much glide distance as possible. And in order to do that, you don't want to put your flaps down, and you don't want to put your gear down, because that reduces the amount of distance you can fly without power. So is it possible that on short final to the runway, bird strike, they aborted the landing, and as they're going around to set up for another one and troubleshooting the loss of that engine, the other engine failed in some manner, and suddenly they had no power. And if they were in that situation, they would have done exactly what they just did, which would turn around to the opposite end of the runway and try to come in like a glider, and you would not want to put the gear down or the flaps down. Now, the tricky part in this scenario, if you'll bear with me on this, Brianna, is that when you're coming down that fast, there's a thing we call ground effect in aviation. It's kind of like a cushion of air, and that causes the aircraft to float as it gets closer to the ground. And so they landed very fast, which was the intent, of course, but very far down the runway. Now, that would probably be okay at a lot of airports, but at this particular airport, unfortunately, there was this reinforced concrete berm, which was the foundation of an important antenna for the instrument landing system. And so when they overran the runway because they were fast and long, they smashed into that berm, causing that huge fireball, killing all but two people. So that's my scenario at the moment. It's the only thing that makes sense to me, because there's no reason that gear should have been up unless the crew wanted it up.
So what would have happened at another airport that did not have what essentially became this physical obstruction, a wall that this plane collided with?
Well, there are 112 runways in the United States that have a type of concrete that is designed to break away under the weight of an aircraft and, for all intents and purposes, act like quicksand. It's called EMAS, and that would stop the airplane very quickly. There also, even if that berm wasn't there, the overrun space between that and the edge of the field probably would have stopped that aircraft before striking that wall, maybe not, but it would have certainly reduced the number of casualties if that obstacle wasn't there. So as part of what South Korea does right now, they should take a hard look at how they design their airports and consider possible obstructions right at the end of a runway, which take away the safety of that overrun space by putting the berm in the way.
Yeah, is this the kind of thing, you think of a bird strike and they're scary things. We are familiar, of course, with the miracle on the Hudson landing back in 2009. Just amazing that people survived that. But is this something that should be survivable, this kind of bird strike?
Yeah, in this case, a lot of people second guessed to the runway at LaGuardia. Well, now we know what happens when you turn back to the runway. As you come in and you come in fast and long, you don't have as much concrete to play with as you think. Now, as it happens at LaGuardia, they do have that engineered material at the end of all their runways, which might have arrested the aircraft before it would have gone into, in that case, the East River. So yes, of course, they should be survivable in this case. It's an unusual circumstance, but if it happens near an airport, which is frequently the case because the birds are at lower altitude anyway, these things happen near airports, passengers should be able to survive if pilots are on top of their game and if the airport is well designed. And in this case, it wasn't a well-designed airport.
Yeah, we've seen when these airliners overshoot the runway, how quickly people evacuate and they all get off so quickly. It's unbelievable, as we've seen in the past. You have the NTSB leading a team to help with the investigation. Of course, there are all these, informed opinions about what may or may not happened based on what we know, but there's a lot we don't know. What is that team going to be looking for, and how long is it going to take to figure it out?
Well, I would caution you. What I just gave you was one piece of potential speculation on a theory. And so with all the caveats that I gave you, it is a theory that would support everything we just saw. But it's really important when you're in crash investigations not to put blinders on and say, oh, that's what happened. The important thing is to be in a very methodical way. Take a look at, everything about the environmental situation, the weather, the possibility of the bird strike, the evidence we have that they did, in fact, had a compressor stall in one engine, lost one engine, the radio calls. And in this case, I think most crucially, Brianna, the cockpit voice recorder is going to tell us a tremendous amount, because this crew was managing, a sudden problem and doing what they could, the best they could do given their training. The decision to go around in that case was probably a sound one. But if they did, in fact, lose a second engine in the process of getting back to the airport, they didn't have much time to play with. But they did get back to that runway. They landed long and fast, and it's a shame that so many people had to die because of that one obstacle there.
Yeah, it certainly is. Miles, thank you so much for your insights. We do appreciate it.